Mahadev Atmanaha. Take up one idea. Make that one idea your life. Dream of it. Think of it. Live on that idea. Let the brain, the body, muscles, nerves, every part of your body be full of that idea. And just leave every other idea alone. This is the way to success. And this is the way great spiritual giants are produced. The eternal history of the Sanatana Dharma stands as a profound testament to the lives of the great souls who have realized their true divine essence and in the process have left indelible marks which have inspired generations who have come after them. The formidable bhakts with their unflinching devotion to their Isht, their chosen supreme. The great yogis who have attained enlightenment through various yogic processes. The enlightened scholars who have enriched many millions of souls through their academic and intellectual pursuits. The devoted Guru Bhakts who have committed their entire lives selflessly to the endeavors of their respective Gurus have all left legacies for which surely there is no parallel in any other tradition, in any other part of the world. These great beings are rare. Rarer, however, are those majestic powers who encompass all of these qualities. Mahatmas of this caliber scarcely choose to visit this plane of existence, and when they do so only to bring about an awesome Adhyatmic revolution. This video is a tribute to one such Adhyatmic power, whose universal teachings have permeated every corner of the world, and have left an ineffaceable imprint on the lives of all those who were fortunate enough to have come in contact with him or his teachings. It is the life of this Swami that brings meaning to the Sanskrit expression na bhuto na bhavishyati, for there never has been such, nor shall there be another. A perfect yogi, a gifted poet, a formidable scholar, an orator par excellence, a true patriot, an inveterate devotee of his Guru, and one of the greatest influences in my life, the flawless creation of his Guru, Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans, the extraordinary Swami Vivekananda. I am indebted to my mother for the efflorescence of my knowledge. Swami Vivekananda was born Narendranath Dutt on the 12th of January 1863 in Calcutta amidst the many festivities of Makar Sankranti in the relatively privileged home of Vishwanath Dutt and Bhuvaneshwari Devi. Swami Vivekananda's father, Vishwanath Dutt, was a legal luminary of his time, a celebrated lawyer of Calcutta, and as a result prospered on account of his legal practice. Swami Vivekananda's mother, Bhuvaneshwari Devi, was known to be a very devout and pious lady with a charitable disposition. After losing a few children in infancy and after giving birth to daughters, Bhuvaneshwari Devi longed for a son. And following the timeless practice, which is still practiced in many parts of the Indian subcontinent today, praying to Shiv, Mahadev, for a son, she arranged for prayers to Vireshwar Mahadev in Kashi through a relative who was living near Varanasi. While having the relative pray to Vireshwar Mahadev in Kashi, she observed strict fasts and penances and had a vision where Shiv himself arose from his dhyan and took the form of a child, her son Narendranath. Soon after Naren, as the great Swami was affectionately called, was born, his father arranged for a celebrated astrologer to make a horoscope and predict the future of his newborn son. The contents of the horoscope were hidden from Naren until many years later, when Swami Vivekananda later found it amongst his father's possessions. It was in fact predicted that Narendranath would live the life of a wandering sannyasi and would achieve great heights in his Adhyatmic pursuits. It is indeed a commonly held belief in our Bharatiya culture that a grandson inherits many traits from his grandfather, and it was certain in this case too of Swami Vivekananda, for his grandfather, the father of Vishwanath Dutt, Durga Prasad Dutt, had an ascetic inclination and had taken sannyas himself to practice various religious penances. This was shortly after the birth of his own son Vishwanath. Narendranath was an overly energetic child endowed with a prodigious mind, a sharp memory, and a steadfast concentration. It was noted that when Narendranath was restless, his mother Bhuvaneshwari Devi had to pour cold water on his head and chant the names of Shiva in his ear, and only then would his restlessness cease. From his earliest boyhood, Narendranath inherited his mother's charitable temperament and would donate freely to wandering monks and sannyasis and those who visited their home. He even had to be locked up on many occasions, for he would, on many accounts, give far too much. Narendranath was known to be very fearless from his earliest years, and proved in an incident when he spent an entire night on a tree which was said to be haunted. Having spent the night, Narendranath returned only to educate his friends to the importance of direct experience, and not to believe simply, but putting those beliefs to relevant tests. This indeed is a practice which Swami Vivekananda indulged in for the remainder of his entire life. Narendranath was blessed with a gifted mind, as related in a popular anecdote in one of his school days, when one day upon returning from recess with his classmates, Narendranath continued to relate various stories to his friends. Annoyed at his pupils' impertinence, their teacher quizzed them, and only Narendranath could answer the questions. When asked who was interrupting these lessons with these whispers, all the students pointed to Narendranath, and the teacher refused to believe them, for it was only Narendranath who could answer the questions. But it was only after Narendranath had confessed that it was indeed him that was relating all these tales and stories to his classmates, that the teachers and his friends were all shocked to learn that the young Narendranath had the gift of concentrating on multiple platforms, understanding the lesson that was being taught by the teacher, while narrating these fascinating stories to his classmates simultaneously. The incidents of Swami Vivekananda's early life, the religious education imparted by his mother, and his own thirst for knowledge and adhyatmic progress was to shape the future life of this great Swami. Education is not filling the mind with a lot of facts. Perfecting the instrument and getting complete mastery of one's own mind is the ideal of education. In 1871, Narendranath joined the Metropolitan Institute for further studies and passed the entrance examination in 1879. In 1880, he joined the Presidency College in Calcutta to study arts. This was also the time the then young Narendranath was introduced to the reformist ideologies of the Brahmo Samaj, having joined its tributary organizations which were working for social causes and relief in and around Bengal. In 1881, Swami Vivekananda joined the Scottish Church College to pursue a degree as a Bachelor of Arts. It has become a trite saying that idolatry is wrong, and every man swallows it at the present time without questioning. I once thought so too, and to pay the penalty of that, I had to learn my lesson sitting at the feet of a man who realized everything through idols. I allude to Ramakrishna Paramhans. The young Narendranath often visited well-known spiritual guides in his search for the ultimate truth, which he firmly believed should be an experiential phenomenon and not a superficial notion to be believed through traditional hearsay. Narendranath had only one question he would routinely ask all those who he would meet: "Have you seen God?" only to receive largely unsatisfactory answers. It was in 1881, at the home of his neighbor Surendranath Mitra, that the young Narendranath met his guru, Thakur Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans, who would bring a complete adhyatmic change in his being. There are multiple variations to the legend of how the young Narendranath first met his guru. According to one account, William Hastie, the then principal of the Scottish Church College where Swami Vivekananda was studying, was delivering an impromptu lecture on William Wordsworth's poem The Excursion, and failing to relate the concept of a trance, he advised his students to visit Ramakrishna Paramhans of Dakshineshwar, famed for routinely going into ecstatic trances. According to another account, it was Surendranath Mitra who invited the young Narendranath to visit his home when Ramakrishna was visiting. Irrespective of the account, the first meeting between Narendranath and Ramakrishna Paramhans was to relieve the impressionable Narendranath of the question that he had asked many before. At the home of Surendranath Mitra, Narendranath was introduced to Sri Ramakrishna, who seemed to have instantly recognized him, much to the bewilderment of the young teenager. As there were no professional singers, Narendranath was requested to sing a hymn, and sang a very well-known hymn, Mana Chalo Nija Niketane, O mind, let us return to our true abode. As the hymn finished, Sri Ramakrishna went into Samadhi, and after arising after a few minutes, Sri Ramakrishna took Narendranath by the hand behind into a separate room and started weeping profusely, questioning his tardiness and why he hadn't come earlier. Ramakrishna related that he had been told that a divine entity would come to carry his message to the world, and Ramakrishna had been waiting patiently for many, many years. After returning to the common room with Narendranath, Narendranath asked Ramakrishna his very direct question, "Sir, have you seen God?" To which Sri Ramakrishna replied, "Yes, I have. I see him just as I see you, but more vividly and with greater intensity." This direct answer to his direct question baffled the young Narendranath, for he had encountered a man who could prove that the ultimate was a reality to be experienced. Towards the end of this historic meeting, Sri Ramakrishna extended an invitation to Narendranath to visit him in Dakshineshwar, but instructed him to come alone. In the month of December in the same year, Narendranath visited Dakshineshwar to meet Sri Ramakrishna for the second time. The first meeting had left an indelible mark on Narendranath. Ramakrishna inquired and asked, "Do you see a bright light which bursts in front of your eyes and covers your body just before you go to sleep?" Narendranath confirmed this and was shocked at how Sri Ramakrishna knew this. Ramakrishna revealed that he had been told that Narendranath was a Dhyana Siddh and a Nitya Siddh, one who had been born with the ability to enter dhyan at will and was forever in a constant state of communion with the divine. To prove this, and so as to show the majesty of his own adhyatmic power, Sri Ramakrishna placed his foot on the chest of Narendranath, who witnessed a complete dissolving of his surroundings and had his first experience of a very powerful yogic trance. Frightened, he tried to return to his normal state, and Ramakrishna nodded and said, "All will come in time." This incident marked the start of an adhyatmic journey which would come to define the great Swami's life and work. Through the many years, Narendranath met his guru several times while studying Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga and Raj Yoga, along with Vedic and Sanskritic studies. In 1884, Narendranath passed the Bachelor of Arts examination with philosophy and logic. The meetings and teachings between Sri Ramakrishna and Narendranath continued, and on 25th of February 1884, Vishwanath Dutt, Narendranath's father, died of a heart condition. This brought a great deal of stress to the family, and the once prosperous family were now struggling to survive. Amidst these various hardships, Narendranath had to take up a teaching job at the Metropolitan Institute just to support his family, and also had to work in an attorney's office in a clerical capacity. In order to aid his job at the attorney's office, Narendranath had to take up legal studies, which was in fact a prerequisite for the job. In 1885, Ramakrishna developed throat cancer, and in December of the same year, Sri Ramakrishna was shifted to Kashipur, a district in northern Calcutta, for his treatment and rest, where Narendranath continued to meet and learn from him. On the 4th of January 1886, Narendranath decided to stay permanently with his guru, and as a result had to give up his legal studies. In January 1886, Sri Ramakrishna bestowed upon his 12 devotees, including Narendranath, sannyas diksha, handing each of them saffron robes. This was the first in a 3-part sannyas initiation which all the 12 devotees of Sri Ramakrishna underwent. In the same year, after imploring his guru for a profound yogic experience, Narendranath experienced Nirvikalpa Samadhi, the most exalted yogic experience. Frightened by the state of Narendranath, the other devotees of Ramakrishna ran to their master, who was unaware of the events taking place, and laughingly joked to his disciples, "Leave him be, he has been pestering me forever, let him experience it." This experience had a profound impact on Narendranath, who then begged his guru for a more intense and a longer yogic experience. Upon hearing this request, Sri Ramakrishna rebuked Narendranath, saying that you are here to bring Adhyatmic change to millions of souls. How can you be so selfish that you wish to experience it for yourself and not work towards the Adhyatmic upliftment of the masses? Narendranath then was told that Sri Ramakrishna would suppress this ability and keep it hidden until Ramakrishna's Ishta Devi, the Bhavatarini Kali of Dakshineshwar's task, was not completed. Afterwards, this power would return to him. Having transferred his yogic abilities to Narendranath, and after entrusting him with all the responsibilities of his various disciples, on the 16th of August 1886, Sri Ramakrishna entered Mahasamadhi. So began the life of the great Swami, who was instructed to carry and lead his brother disciples and carry the message of Vedānt to the world. And in so doing, completing the task Bhavatarini Kali had instructed her devotee Sri Ramakrishna to complete through his disciple Swami Vivekananda. India I loved before I came away. Now the very dust of India has become holy to me. The very air is now to me holy. It is now the Holy Land, the place of pilgrimage, the Tirth. Upon the Mahasamadhi of Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans, the 12 disciples, christened by many the 12 apostles of Ramakrishna, led by Swami Vivekananda, moved to Baranagar or Varahanagar and established a modest monastery there, with a singular aim to spread the teachings of their Guru Sri Ramakrishna to the world. On the 25th of December 1886, all 12 disciples of Sri Ramakrishna took a vow, which would be the second step in their sannyas initiation, a vow of dedicating their lives to the profound expression of the Rigved, Atmano Mokshartham Jagaditaya Cha, striving for the liberation of the self and doing good for the world. This commitment, born of dedication, service and study, would form the motto of their organization. In January in the following year, all 12 disciples of Sri Ramakrishna took the third and final step towards their ascetic lives by formally initiating themselves into sannyas, according to the various scriptural injunctions. It was upon this initiation Swami Vivekananda initially took the name Swami Satchidananda Puri, interchanging it with Swami Vivedeshanand, until finally assuming the name Swami Vivekananda later. Swami Vivekananda, now a formal sannyasi, took the form of a parivrajaka, one who would tour the vast landscapes of the land and spread the wisdom of the Ved. Having witnessed firsthand the very majesty of Adhyatmic truth, Swami Vivekananda wished to comprehend the plight of his people, why India was economically and socially backward, and why the land of the divine Ved was forced to suffer at the hands of foreign colonial powers. It was with this aim that Swami Vivekananda began his pilgrimage tour of India in the year 1888. Having toured many parts of Bengal and central India, Swami Vivekananda reached the western state of India, the land of Rajputana, in the state of Alwar. Welcomed by the Maharaja of Alwar for scriptural and philosophical talks, Swami Vivekananda accepted the king's invitation, paving the way for a celebrated anecdote which would come to define the wit, intellect and resolve of the great Swami. The Maharaja of Alwar was opposed to the practice of idol worship, considering it a lowly form of worship where the physical was prayed to as the supreme, with the supreme not actually residing in the idol. Having had the opportunity to ask an initiated sannyasi, the king voiced his concerns. Swami Vivekananda wished to show the king the practical implication of idol worship and summoned a servant in waiting. Hanging on the wall of a royal court was a portrait of the king, and Swami Vivekananda commanded the servant to spit on the portrait of the king, an unthinkable act of insult. When the servant refused to do so, Swami Vivekananda explained to the rather baffled king that though the king himself doesn't reside in the portrait showing a likeness of the king was no less dear to the servant, for in that portrait the servant saw his king and respected the portrait as if it was the king himself. The servant's refusal to spit on the portrait conveyed the essence of idol worship, cleared the doubts in the mind of the king, and showed the world the practical wisdom of Swami Vivekananda. In June 1891, Swami Vivekananda, while still in the state of Rajputana, visited the state of Khetri. Here he met for the first time the king of Khetri, Maharaja Ajit Singh, with whom he developed a lifelong friendship. Having spent several months as a guest of Ajit Singh of Khetri, Swami Vivekananda travelled to Limbdi, a state in the Kathiawar region of western India. It was in Limbdi where Swami Vivekananda met the then Shukācharya of Puri and realized the importance of taking the message of Vedānt and the message of the Sanatana Dharma as taught by his Guru Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans to the West. While in the Kathiawar region, Swami Vivekananda came to know of the World Parliament of Religions, which was being held in America, and realized that this was the opportunity for the truth of the Sanatana Dharma to shine on the world platform. After spending months on foot travelling to various parts of India, in the month of December in 1892, Swami Vivekananda made his way to the most southern point of the Indian subcontinent, Kanyakumari. Here, Swami Vivekananda swam southward into the ocean, towards the rock which now bears his name, the Swami Vivekananda Rock. Here, Swami Vivekananda sat in dhyan for 3 days, contemplating on the future of his work and the past, present, and future of India. After understanding the material needs of his people for the welfare and progress of his nation, Swami Vivekananda dedicated his life to the pursuit of uplifting the common masses of India. This dedication, made on the 24th of December 1892, would later be known as the Resolve of Kanyakumari. In line with his fervent hope to travel to the West to preach the truth of Dharma, Swami Vivekananda visited Madras and enlisted his name for a trip to America. Swami Vivekananda then notified his disciples back in Bengal of his plans and asked them to collect funds for this voyage. Alasing Perumal, a devout disciple of Swami Vivekananda, took it upon himself to arrange a committee which would engage in fundraising for this trip. By April the following year, Swami Vivekananda was requested by his friend Ajit Singh of Khetri to once again visit Khetri and bless his newborn son, the prince. Along with supporting Swami Vivekananda financially, Ajit Singh also arranged transportation, amenities and clothes for the Swami. As scholarly discussions continued between both friends, and greatly impressed by the intellectual prowess of Swami Vivekananda, his innate ability to find essential truth, Ajit Singh of Khetri requested Swami Vivekananda to take the name Vivekananda, a name itself meaning the bliss of the intellect. Along with the name, Swami Vivekananda also took the traditional headgear, the turban, the Rajputana saffron pagdi, which would later be a prominent symbol of the great Swami himself. Before embarking on his journey to the West, Swami Vivekananda desired to get the blessings and permission of Sharda Devi, the wife and consort of his Guru Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans, and hence travelled back to the monastery in Bengal. While in the monastery, Swami Vivekananda realized that Sharda Devi was preparing a meal in the kitchen when Swami Vivekananda approached her for permission. Sharda Devi asked Swami Vivekananda to pass her a knife. Having passed her the knife and having received the knife, Sharda Devi gave her permission and blessed Swami Vivekananda. Swami Vivekananda asked why Sharda Devi asked for the knife before blessing him. She replied that she wanted to test the great Swami. She wished to see how he would pass the knife, extending the blade part as one normally would, or extending the handle part. Swami Vivekananda had kept the blade towards himself and had handed the handle part to his Guru mother, Sharda Devi. Sharda Devi replied that you are willing to take a blade which can cut your hand, but you will give the other the handle to protect the other's hand. This is the essence of dharma, doing good to others, protecting others even at the cost of oneself. This is what I wish to see, and you truly have a dharmic mind. You have my blessings, you may go. Having received Sharda Devi's permission and blessings, Swami Vivekananda left for Bombay, the first port of his travel to the West. Just as the Western ideal is to keep up luxury in practical life, so ours is to keep up the highest form of spirituality, to demonstrate that religion is riot merely frothy words, but can be carried out, every bit of it, in this life. On the 31st of May 1893, Swami Vivekananda left Bombay by sea on an eastward journey to America. As the journey was eastbound, Swami Vivekananda had the opportunity to visit many ports and had many experiences which further strengthened his belief that India was indeed the cradle of civilization. Having visited the Sri Lankan port of Colombo and various ports in Southeast Asia, Swami Vivekananda reached Hong Kong, where he learnt the power of business and enterprise. In China and Japan, Swami Vivekananda visited many Buddhist shrines which housed ancient Sanskrit texts, proving the influence Sanatana Dharma and the Ved had on many parts of the world. From Yokohama in Japan, Swami Vivekananda set sail for Vancouver, and then by train reaching Chicago on the 30th of July. It was when he reached Chicago, the great Swami realized that the Parliament was to convene in September, and that the registration for the delegates was completed, and that he had failed to meet the credential requirements to represent the Sanatana Dharma in the World Parliament of Religions. In order to save expenses, he left the costlier Chicago for Boston, where he met by chance the Harvard professor John Henry Wright, who was deeply impressed by Swami Vivekananda's grasp, intellect, and ideals, and welcomed the great Swami to his home, and also arranged a place for the great Swami at the as a delegate in the Parliament. Wright also arranged for the Swami's travel back to Chicago. Having faced many hurdles, Swami Vivekananda finally reached Chicago, and on the 11th of September 1893, the World Parliament of Religions was officially convened. Speakers from all religions and all parts of the world were represented. This was to be Swami Vivekananda's first major address to the world, and before he approached the podium, he bowed to Devi Saraswati and spoke the famous first 5 words of his historic speech: "Sisters and brothers of America." Upon hearing these words, it is said that the entire hall stood up and gave a standing ovation and clapped in amazement for 2 whole minutes. This was an act of adoration which was not accorded to any other delegate. Many years later, when questioned by one of his disciples as to why this respect was accorded to the great Swami, who not only had never spoken before, but that too was speaking for the first time to a foreign audience, Swami Vivekananda revealed to his disciple that it was a profound secret. He revealed that on that historic day, through those historic words, he had invoked the power of Sri Ramakrishna, which had transfixed his audience, who were forced to stand and clap in amazement. He revealed that he was only able to achieve this feat because of his austere practice of brahmacharya, celibacy, and because of his unflinching devotion to his Guru, Sri Ramakrishna. In the historic speech, Swami Vivekananda quoted the famous verse of the Shiva Mahimna Stotra, proving that as different tributaries eventually reach the same sea, so do all persuasions, sects, and religions ultimately lead to the same Supreme. Swami Vivekananda related the firm truths of the Sanatana Dharma, along with highlighting the need for tolerance and universal acceptance. The speech made Swami Vivekananda an instant success, and he was dubbed the greatest delegate in the parliament by various local tabloids. Swami Vivekananda was instantly welcomed by many organizations to deliver lectures and talks on both the Sanatana Dharma and Vedanta Darshan, which he did for the next few months. In 1895, Swami Vivekananda started a series of talks on the Upanishads, explaining the various facets of Raj Yoga and Gyan Yoga. In June of the same year, Swami Vivekananda started to initiate disciples at Thousand Island Park in New York. In September, Swami Vivekananda traveled to England for a series of lectures, and by the end of the year, in December, he returned to New York. And also in New York held a series of classes on Karma Yoga. In February 1896, Swami started the Vedānt Society of New York, where he held classes on Bhakti Yoga. It was during this period that Swami Vivekananda was offered the chair of Oriental Philosophy at Harvard and the Sanskrit chair at the University of Columbia. Seeing as this would be against his role as a sannyasi, he declined both of these offers and instead continued to preach Vedant throughout America. In April 96, Swami Vivekananda travelled once again to England, where he held discourses on Jnana Yoga, and also met with the famous Orientalist and philosopher Max Müller. In July of the same month, Swami Vivekananda visited Switzerland and Germany, and returned to England by October. Before returning to India, Swami Vivekananda made a trip to Italy, where he saw the formidable preservation of Western culture. By the 15th of January 1897, Swami Vivekananda reached the Sri Lankan port of Colombo to a tremendous welcome. Swami Vivekananda toured South India, and before returning to Calcutta by the 25th of February, he then went to Alam Bazar, where the Ramakrishna monastery was then situated, to another rousing welcome by his fellow compatriots and monk brethren. Give me 100 young, energetic youth, and I shall transform India. Having returned from the West, Swami Vivekananda realized that India now required a new order, one which would prove to be a confluence of Bharatiya wisdom, humanity and Adhyatma, and Western material progress. In order to promote these ideals, on the 1st of May 1897, the monks of the modest Ramakrishna monastery, led by Swami Vivekananda, officially formed the Ramakrishna mission in Calcutta. True to their vow and motto, the monks of the Ramakrishna mission immediately engaged in preaching Vedant through various discourses and lectures all around India, as well as serving all those who were suffering hardships due to the persistent famines in and around Bengal. In 1898, Swami Vivekananda welcomed some of his Western disciples who had made a pilgrimage to India to see their Guru, Swami Vivekananda, and to visit the many pilgrimage sites with him. In the middle of the same year, Swami Vivekananda took a yatra, a pilgrimage trip to Amarnath. It was noted that during this trip, Swami Vivekananda experienced yogic trances and had visions of Mahadev. In December 1898, the construction of a new mutt monastery in Belur was initiated, with the consecration ceremony being held on the 9th of December 1898. In March of the following year, Swami Vivekananda's Western disciples formed the Advaita Ashram in Mayavati, in northern India, in the foothills of the Himalaya. It seems, however advanced the Western nations are in scientific culture, they are mere babies in metaphysical and spiritual education. In 1899, Swami Vivekananda made his second trip to the West with a view to consolidate his lectures in his first trip in the form of institutions which would continue the work set out by his discourses in his first trip. Travelling through Italy and France, Swami Vivekananda reached England on the 31st of July 1899, where he continued to deliver lectures on Vedant. In August 1899, he reached America and stayed predominantly in California, opening Vedanta centers in San Francisco and Oakland. In Santa Clara, the Swami opened an ashram, a hermitage, which would enable initiates to practice sadhana, engage in scriptural studies, and serve the local community. In this trip, Swami Vivekananda was joined by two of his brother monks, Swami Turiyanand and Swami Abhedanand. Swami Turiyanand would go on to lead the Vedanta Center in Montclair, and Swami Abhedanand would serve in the Vedanta Society of New York. In August 1900, Swami Vivekananda arrived in France to attend the Congress of History of Religions, where his addresses received similar praise. From October of the same year, Swami Vivekananda toured Vienna, Austria, Greece, and Egypt, and by December 1900, Swami Vivekananda returned to India. I don't want to work. I want to be quiet and rest. I know the time and the place, but the fate, or karma, I think, drives me on. Work, work. In 1901, Swami Vivekananda arrived at the Advaita Ashram in Mayavati on the account of the passing of one of his Western disciples who was instrumental in building the Mayavati Ashram. On the 24th of January 1901, Swami Vivekananda returned to Belur Mutt, where he remained for most of the year due to his ill health, which was dominated by his chronic diabetes. It was during this time the great Swami predicted to many disciples, both through interaction and letters, that he would not see 40, stating that his soul was getting bigger and bigger and could no longer be bound in his mortal physical coil. During the Navratri festivities of the same year, Belur Mutt celebrated Durga Puja with great pomp and celebration. In the beginning of 1902, Swami Vivekananda made a final pilgrimage to Bodh Gaya and Kashi and returned to Belur Mutt for the February celebrations of Sri Ramakrishna's birthday, which was celebrated with similar fervour. Swami Vivekananda spent his final months in Belur Mutt teaching and inspiring his disciples and brother monks in the work of his Guru Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans. On the 4th of July 1902, Swami Vivekananda was in relatively good health, arose early in the morning and spent several hours in dhyan. During the day, Swami Vivekananda taught the students Sanskrit Vyakaran, grammar, Shukla Yajurved, and the aphorisms of yoga. Later, he discussed the building of a Vedic college for further studies in the Ramakrishna Mutt, and at 7 p.m., he instructed his disciples to not disturb him when he entered his room for dhyan for a further 2 hours. At 9 p.m., his disciples noticed some blood dripping from his nose, indicating that while in dhyan, Swami Vivekananda had pierced the Brahmarandra, the crown of his head, and had attained Mahasamadhi. True to his prescient nature and prophetic ability, Swami Vivekananda fulfilled his own prophecy of not seeing 40, for on the day of his Mahasamadhi, he was, in fact, 39. Even in his passing, Swami Vivekananda left a message. America, largely, was the land where the great Swami preached, and it was in America that he first saw roaring success. The great Swami chose to free himself of his mortal coil on the day of the American independence, 4th of July, almost as an indication of the value of freedom and casting away the shackles that bind us, paving our way for progress and illumination. The following day, he was cremated on a sandalwood pyre on the banks of the Ganga, opposite to where his Guru, Sri Ramakrishna Paramhans, was cremated 16 years earlier. Today, a shrine dedicated to the memory of Swami Vivekananda stands on the soil upon which the great Swami's mortal remains were consigned to flames. It may be that I shall find it good to get outside my body, to cast it off like a worn-out garment, but I shall not cease to work. I shall inspire men everywhere until the whole world shall know that it is one with God. The life of Swami Vivekananda has been a source of inspiration for millions, both during his lifetime and after his passing. From the earliest accounts of his ceaseless thirst for experiential religion to his deliverance through his Guru, Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda expressed in full measure every sphere of human existence and experience. Through his perfect practice of the process of yoga to his unsurpassed command of Vedic scriptures, from complete surrender to his Guru to his formidable dedication towards his disciples, Swami Vivekananda translated the ideal of Shishya, Guru, Sannyasi and Bhakt for the modern age, creating in the process an ideal to follow. I hope all those who have watched this video take inspiration from this great Swami and commit themselves to the ideal of the Ved and strive to follow the example set by Swami Vivekananda, to work for the liberation of the self and for the good of the world. I urge all those who watch this video to read the complete works of Swami Vivekananda, an exhaustive collection of all the writings, speeches and lectures documented during the life of the great Swami. May the blessings of the fruition of Sri Ramakrishna's penance, the king among men Narendranath, the great master, the Swami, and the endless bliss of the singular intellect Vivekanand be upon you all. Uttishtata, Jagrata, Prapya, Varannibodhata. Arise, awake, and stop not till the goal is reached. Mahadev.